Every woman you will be with from here on out will thank you for reading this book. Why would you not want to be like the best, person in a sexual encounter that you can be? And he wrote back, good point. And I said, I'm sending it to you, and I'm inscribing it from Grandpa.
I love the family stories. I love this. Well,
I kind of want to know what Thanksgiving is.
I know. Absolutely. This is the best part. It's just like we're all sitting around and having this what will be an amazing conversation. First of all, we want to welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to Brown Bookstore for being an amazing partner. Thank you to everybody who's come out to support Foster Forward. And would you please silence the phones? Thank you. Oh, I love there's movement. Sometimes mine is silenced.
I'm trying to put mine on Do Not Disturb.
There's always that one, but maybe not today. We're going to have a conversation with Peggy, then we're going to open this up to question and answers, so please be thinking of your questions. When we're finished, we'll let Peggy go back to where you registered, and she'll be there to sign books, and Brown Bookstore is up there selling books. Emily and I are thrilled to have you here. Just to let you know, this is presented by the Cardigan Connection, and our next event is January 21st. We're always third Tuesdays, and authors joining us on the 21st are...
See if I can... I said I would do this.
You did say it.
Okay.
You did.
We've got Anna Wiener, Caroline Zancan, E.J. Coe, Richard J. King, and... Kylie Reed.
She's whispering.
Kylie Reed, whose book just hit the New York Times. It came out on, right?
Yeah.
Number one. It hit the Times anyway. So that's happening then. And then also on January 27th, we have Courtney Mom before and after the book deal. And we're hosting that at What Cheer Writers Club. So there are tickets for that. Do you know Courtney?
No, I just like the name of the book.
Before and after the book deal.
Because that has things to say about that.
Do you? What would you like to say before we begin?
Before it's like, I want a book deal, and after it's like, oh no, I want a book deal. That's basically it.
Yeah. Did you guys all get that?
And you have to lie on the floor and cry for like 2 years.
There's a little bit of that. Yeah.
As exciting as it is.
And it is exciting. And that's the thing. This book came out on Tuesday, on the 6th, right? Boys and
My
Sex?
book?
Yeah.
Yes.
It just came out. Today's the 11th. So if we do the math, it just came out. So that's really exciting, and we've been following your tour and all of the amazing media.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's really exciting.
Do you want me to do the proper introduction?
Now the proper introduction.
I don't know, or not.
Yes, of course.
Just skip this part.
No.
Okay, so Peggy Orenstein is the New York Times bestselling author of Girls and Sex, Cinderella Ate My Daughter, Waiting for Daisy, Flux, and Schoolgirls, a contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine. She has been published in the Washington Post, Slate, The Atlantic, USA Today, Parenting, Salon. Oh my God. It just goes
just
on and on.
stop.
I know.
Just stop.
Isn't it fun to hear this?
Plus more.
It's not necessary. But I do want to know, where do you get this bio?
Your publicist.
Okay, because they always skip a book.
Which one did they skip? Your favorite one?
Don't Call Me Princess, which was an anthology of my my work. Yeah.
And Don't Call Me Princess, an anthology of
I
Peggy's
like
work.
that book.
Absolutely.
They published it. I don't know why they keep skipping it.
Before and after the book deal.
Well, and she lives in Northern California with her husband and her daughter, and we're so excited to have Peggy here
Yay,
today.
Peggy.
Thanks for having me.
We've been looking forward to this since it was as hot as it is right now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, right? When we planned this, it
Long
was
time.
this weather, and now we're back to January, and it's the same.
This weather again.
It's the same, yeah.
Okay, well, now my first question seems so anticlimactic.
No pun intended.
It's not your first question.
Can't help myself.
I know you can't.
I really can't.
Well, I just kind of wanted to dive in with kind of talking about all of the interviewing that you did for this book, which was really amazing, and kind of how you were able to stay true to all of the people and the boys that you spoke with, but also it's a book and you're driving narrative, so how do you remain true to the voices of everyone that you spoke with, but also writing this piece?
That's my job. It's my 7th book. The voices are at the center of the book, and they really drive it. And one of the things about writing, so for Boys and Sex, as with Girls and Sex, I talked to, in this case, over 100 guys between the ages of 16 and 22, all across the country, who, they were all either in college or college bound, so it was that demographic, but beyond that, they spanned a vast range of backgrounds and ethnicities and sexual orientations and just sort of a wide range of attitudes, things that they like to do, everything. And when the thing about reporting these two books is that I don't really go in with an agenda. So I don't really have something that, and there's a kind of desire when you're a writer to want to know your story and direct your story, and then because it feels better to do it that way. It's scary to go out and go, I don't know what I'm going to write about. I'm just going to see what happens, and I do a lot of stuff that never makes it in too. A lot of things that I go, I think, well, will this be a good scene? Maybe this would be a good scene. Maybe I'd learn something if I did this. So it's a very kind of organic process and really driven by the people that I talk to. So for instance, one of my favorite scenes in Boys and Sex is when I'm talking to I'm Skyping with a boy who has referred to him, can I swear?
Yeah, it's fine with me.
Okay, I just meant for your podcast.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
You don't care, right?
Okay.
I
got it.
So this guy refers to himself as a feminist fuckboy. And what he means by that is that he knows all the right things to say. He knows the consent rules. He teaches workshops on consent for guys on college campuses. He's scrupulous, but he also has been realizing that that doesn't keep him from being kind of emotionally manipulative and treating partners as disposable, and looking at underlying gender power dynamics that put him in a position of control in his hookups. He's a big hookup guy. And so he's been sort of working through this and figuring it out. We've been talking for a year. He's kind of on the other side. He's kind of decided the hookup scene is sort of hollow. He doesn't want to be part of that anymore. And we're having this conversation via Skype, and suddenly I get a text from another boy that I've been interviewing, who is now, he's a senior in high school, and he's looking at the colleges that he's been admitted to, so he's going around and trying to decide where to go. And he's in Southern California, and he was a boy who was not into the concept of hookups. He had a bad experience. He was more, he wanted to have a connection with people. And he texted me and said, WTF, it's like an orgy down here. What am I supposed to do? Just go to Bone Town and worry about connecting after, or should I just forget about that part? Yeah, it's a text.
Yeah.
And
like a Siri text?
Like a phone text. And what do I do? And so I look at this, and I'm talking to this other boy, and I said, hey, Wyatt, let me read you this text from Nate, and tell me what you think I should say to him. And this is also, by the way, I don't want to say this in case she listens to it. Cut that. I was going to say something about my daughter, but I don't talk about
No, you don't talk about
it. But anyway, I read the text to him, and they ended up having this conversation through me,
wow.
A total stranger, which I thought, imagine if they could, if boys could really have these conversations, either amongst themselves or with actual adults in their lives. Because what happened was then, they talked about this, and Wyatt, the feminist fuckboy, was saying, if this isn't who you are, man, it's going to kill you. You really got to be true to yourself. And a lot of people don't do the hookup scene, don't feel pressured, all this stuff. And at the end, Nate wrote, thank you, that was just what I needed to hear. And he sent me a little heart emoji. And he went on his way. And so, yes, I thought, wow, what if guys could actually have these conversations? And B, as a writer and reporter, this is like one of those moments that I can never predict.
Never.
But that you
right.
just hope that if you just hang out long enough, that you'll see stuff and hear stuff and absorb stuff that will be of value.
That's amazing with the timing of that. And also just listening to the way you talked, that this young man was texting you and that you were Skyping. These interviews were not just one and done, right? So
No.
These conversations have continued.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. Some of them were just one-time shots. Obviously, 100 guys, I'm not going to interview multiple times. But, one of the things that was a little different about this book, actually. With Girls and Sex, there were a few girls like that I talked to in an ongoing way. But With the boy book, I stayed in touch with the guys a lot longer, and followed them sort of, in a, not, really intensely, but sort of on and off, sometimes for a couple of years, which was great, and also I think spoke to, again, that they have nobody to talk to.
They need to be heard, yeah.
The main, point of this, I was going to say thrust, but that wouldn't be funny. The main point of this that I took away from this book was how we don't talk to boys, we don't listen to boys, and we don't believe that they will have anything to say on a really fundamental level. I mean, I didn't. I worried that I'd have entire transcripts of no,
Did you get any of that, or not really?
Sometimes, but mostly, they really wanted to talk. They really wanted to talk because nobody was talking to them, and they had a lot to say, and really a lot about their interior lives, which they could narrate with a lot of insight and clarity, and in ways that I hadn't expected, and I really wanted to bring forward.
And you mentioned the heart emoji that you were sent, and so in reading the book, a lot of disconnect from the heart. I'm talking about boys being so disconnected. So can you speak to that?
Yeah. It was. I felt, if I have to soundbite it, that Girls and Sex was about the ways that girls are disconnected from their bodies and their desires, and Boys and Sex is about the ways that boys are disconnected from their hearts. And in a very real way, those two things then end up fitting together to disadvantage everybody, and to make communication difficult and to make relationships difficult. And the guys that I was talking to, they did, they were really egalitarian in a lot of ways. They saw girls, of course, as entitled to their place in the classroom and in leadership roles and on the playing field. And in terms of professional opportunities and all of that, they had gay friends, which you wouldn't have seen, 10, 15 years ago in the same way. But when I would ask them things like, what's the ideal guy? It was like they were channeling 1955.
Still, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
and it really reminded me of how when I used to talk to girls, how girls too had all these new ideas that they had learned, that we wanted them to learn, and yet all the old stuff was still there, layered underneath it, and it hadn't been let go, and they were suffering from that contradiction. So boys too, were much more aware, especially emotional. I mean, it was athleticism, it was aggression, it was this weird dominance, it was this weird kind of thing of being, you're simultaneously supposed to be aggressive and chill. I don't know how you do that. And sexual conquest, of course, athleticism, and emotional suppression, was a huge one. And they talked about things like, being aware of when the wall went up, feeling like I trained myself not to feel was something that a lot of guys said, or not being able to cry. There was the guy who told me that he couldn't cry when his parents got divorced, right? And so he
watched the movies?
He watched 3 Holocaust movies back to back.
That'll do it.
That would do it. Yeah. But there was this. I felt that at the very heart of the book. I mean, a lot of that is in the first chapter, but really throughout, you see the way that boys are wrestling with emotional vulnerability and their relationship to it, and whether it's possible, whether it's not possible, whether it's shameful, whether they have to deny it, whether they have to deflect it, whether they're supposed to ignore it, and the impact of that on them and radiating outward on the relationships, because human vulnerability, Brene Brown says that it's the secret sauce that holds relationships together. And so if you disconnect boys from that, it makes it very difficult for them to establish and sustain really mutually satisfying relationships.
I'm just thinking. Oh, you're just thinking.
Just a small point.
Well, just a small point. Well, and that's, so what can we do? We have these conversations. You talk to all these boys, and one of the things that I was thinking of, because you did so many books with the girls, and so then it was like, okay, now I know with the Me Too movement, and sort of time is absolutely right for this, but had it gone through your mind before that, like, oh, I want to talk to boys?
No,
not at all.
people have been telling me since Girls and Sex came out. There'd been a lot, and it's funny because a lot of people. Just the other day, there was a producer on a radio show who said, "Remember, I told you to write this book." And I thought,
they want to thank you in it.
Well, a lot of people, a lot of parents of sons, asked me if I would write. Suggested this book, and I was quite resistant, partly because. I write about girls, and I wasn't sure boys would talk, and but then, I had just begun when the Me Too revelations began, and that, yes, created a new kind of urgency. It created an imperative to reduce sexual violence, but to my mind, and I think the more positive, if you will, spin on it was that it created this opportunity to take a look at these issues and to engage boys, maybe for the first time, in long overdue conversations about sex, about intimacy, and about masculinity, and really think about, how we can help them make the best choices and raise them to be the men that we want them to be, and that we know they can be.
No, go ahead.
Okay. No, because I just think kind of jumping off of that, I think that this book is a really amazing kind of Kickstarter for parents or anyone that works with kids. But how might you suggest that parents or adults kind of take the first step in having some of these conversations?
Well, the first thing is obviously, and yes, that's what I wanted. I wanted the book to be a tool. I wanted it to be a tool for adults to be able to see sort of into the heads and hearts of guys and see about how they're socialized. And how that results in their approach to sex and relationships, and also for guys themselves, because I hope that if boys were reading it, teenage boys, college-age boys, that they would be able to reflect on other guys' stories and maybe open up a more meaningful dialogue with their friends or even in their own heads. So, I mean, there's so many things to talk about in terms of the issues, and my hope is that parents start by reading and seeing what the issues are, and then for the first time really with this book, I don't know how many of you are writers, but if you're a writer, right, the first thing you learn is show and not tell, right? So my kind of approach had always been in other books that in my final chapter, I should take, I was not going to be prescriptive. I was going to take you into a scenario or a profile of a person or go into a program or a classroom and show what things could look like. And I kept trying to do that with this book. I kept trying, and I went into some really great situations, really ideal, really wonderful and inspiring, but they weren't doing it for me. And I realized that after 9 years of talking about adolescent sexuality, writing about adolescent sexuality, that I had some things to say. And so I really came out from behind the curtain for the first time in that last chapter and talk about the sorts of conversations we can have with boys that are about sex, but not just about sex, about gender and power dynamics, about media, about pornography. And, in a lot of them are conversations that I can't give you a script, but I know that you'd rather poke yourself in the eye with a fork than have a lot of these conversations. But, what my hope was that either through the book or through a podcast like this, or just starting. This is the long way of answering your question. The short piece is just say something.
Yeah, I mean, the conversations that are really hard to have are the most important ones usually.
Yeah.
And you talked about all of the issues, and so the subtext of the book, Young Men on Hookups, Love, Porn, Consent, and Navigating the New Masculinity, reading various chapters and talking about a lot of guys' first, sex ed, if you will, was through pornography, and talk about that, because I think a lot of parents are surprised.
Yeah, so there's been so sure. I just wanted to say one other thing about the parents before I get to that. What boys tended to say to me that parents said to them was, "Don't get a girl pregnant, don't get a disease, and respect women." And on the respect women piece, what they would say, like, which women, who, under what sort of, one boy said, that's like telling your son not to run over any little old ladies and then handing him the car keys. Nobody thinks they're going to run over any little old ladies, but you still don't know how to drive.
Right.
So when parents don't talk, there's lots of research that shows that parents talk even less to their boys than they do to their girls, and they don't talk a whole lot to their girls. Schools, it's been a disaster. So what does that leave? I mean, it's this weird thing where kids are drenched in sexually explicit, transactional, commodified media while we stay completely silent about what constitutes a healthy, mutually gratifying sexual relationship. So the default educator for a lot of kids, and you can see this in research now, ends up being porn. And I want to be really clear about a few things. One is curiosity about sex is normal. Masturbation, yay, great thing to do. There's all kinds of porn. There's queer porn, there's ethical porn, there's feminist porn. All that is behind a paywall. What has changed was that, obviously internet and smartphones, and then in 2007, Pornhub went online and dropped the paywall. And suddenly, for the first time, anything that you can imagine, and a whole lot of things you don't want to imagine, were at anybody's fingertips for free 24/7. So that was the thing that changed, and that's why we no longer have the luxury of silence. Because the image of sex that is in that easy access porn reinforces all these ideas of male entitlement, female sexual submission and availability over and over. Sex is something that men do to, not with women. That female pleasure is a performance for male satisfaction. Bodies are distorted. All these. There's so much that's not there, and it's just really important, just on a baseline level, that boys understand, what's real, what's not real, what's not there. But there's other things too, and if they don't, because they are bringing these ideas into the bedroom. They're definitely bringing these ideas into the bedroom. But there's also, there's what I also wanted to present, and this was sort of a deeper slice on that porn conversation, of understanding things like the physiology of arousal better. Because boys are conditioning it's not that porn is like addictive quite like a drug is addictive, but it can become compulsive, and boys can link their cycle because they start using it now from the get-go, so they link their cycle of arousal, desire arousal and release to porn. And guys would say to me things like, one guy said, that there was a guy on his crew team who had decided not to use porn anymore, and the other boys called him a legend. And they said, he said, like, what do you do? And he said, I use my imagination. And they were like, whoa, how do you do that? Trying to help guys understand things like differentiate between what's highly arousing and what's liked, wanted, and pleasurable. Because just because your body is having a response to something, including an erection, does not mean that it's liked or wanted. It's kind of like Emily Nagoski, who wrote one of the great books on sex, Come As You Are. Yeah, one of my very favorite books. She likens it to being tickled, like by somebody that you don't like. Being tickled by somebody you hate. You would laugh, doesn't mean you like it. And so understanding these kind of mind, brain, body divisions, I think in itself can be really useful for boys. So I wanted to include a lot the kind of research around that, as well as boys' different perspectives and stories on how they felt porn use did or didn't affect their partnered sexual interactions.
And also, when you talked to girls for so long, and especially with the book Girls and Sex, did you feel like you were talking to two absolutely different species, or did the boys say things that sort of corroborated what the girls were feeling?
Yeah, it felt more symbiotic. It felt more like they were sort of talking to each other, but not with me.
But like
not with each other, but through me. Yeah, and I actually did have a, I went to a freshman pregame one night, which is not at all awkward. Not at all awkward.
Wow.
Yeah.
Solo cup and all?
I don't have the solo cup, but they did. I'm hanging around freshman pregame thinking, oh God, when can I go home? And then the kids went off to a party, and then the next day I met with a group of them in a dorm room, and we had this whole conversation, which inevitably, because it always does in hookup culture, devolved to why they're ambivalent about it, and the kind of fraught. The fraught aspects of hookup culture and the ways you're supposed to be less friendly after a hookup than before a hookup. As one guy summed it up by saying, it's like he said, you don't make much eye contact and there's not much conversation, and it's like you're it's again the vulnerability. He said it's like you're acting vulnerable without being vulnerable. which is, he said, it's not a problem necessarily, but it's odd and it's not very fun. And so I was talking with these kids, and we were talking about, the difficulty of connecting with somebody the day after the hookup, and the whole fraught business of exposing that you've caught feelings, which is one of my favorite phrases, because it's like catching feelings, like it's a disease,
like
right?
A cold.
Like chlamydia. You catch chlamydia, you catch syphilis, you catch feelings, And they were talking about sort of wrestling with this, and then we finished talking, and they said, can we do this again next week?
Yeah.
Right? And I was like, yeah, but I'm not going to be here.
You could do the Peggy Orenstein dorm tour.
Don't live in the dorm,
That would be fun, though. Just go visit different dorms, like a PJ party with Peggy.
Okay, so I actually have a home and a family. And
no, I know that. I understand that. I understand that before and after the book deal.
Yeah.
But I was thinking the reason that it's so awkward after, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, what, the party?
Well, no, I love talking to you. I mean,
yeah.
That would be my ideal if I didn't have things like a home and a family.
No, I know. Sometimes those things can get in the way.
Yeah.
I think the reason things are so awkward the next day is because they're sober.
Right. Because Lisa Wade, who another of my favorite writers who wrote American Hookup, says that getting hammered, hookup culture is not. It's dependent on alcohol to create what she calls the compulsory carelessness necessary to engage in a hookup. So the next day, I was talking to one guy at a college in the Midwest who was saying that he hooked up with this girl, and he just, like, when he saw her the next day coming towards him, he just averted his eyes. And I said, and this is something that girls would complain. This is why I say it's symbiotic. Girls would complain about this, and I should also say there were girls who were into the hookup culture. There were girls who were not. There were boys who were into it. There were boys who were not. They all had their various reasons. But so this boy averted his eyes, and I said, why? And he said, well, I don't know what she's thinking. Maybe she thinks it was just like a one-off at a party and that's it, and she doesn't want to interact anymore. And so, I don't want to be like an idiot and say, hey,
hello.
really good to see you. Like, hi. Hi.
Weren't you that
and
girl?
I said, so you would rather, miss an opportunity to make a real connection and have something more with this girl than, take the risk of doing that. And he said, yeah. And I said, but why? And again, back to the vulnerability. He said, I thought I might seem weak. I might seem like vulnerable. I don't want to look, I don't want to be embarrassed. So he just walked on by. And that girl's probably thinking, why is that boy walking on by?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's, as far as we've come, it would seem so far that we've come so far with in a lot of the discussions about men and their feels and being more, and all of that, but it sounds like really not. Like we sort of say it, but we don't really mean it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, when I would talk about girls, and we would talk about, their relationship to their bodies and their relationships to pleasure. We think we've come so far, and yet because we have no conversations whatsoever, not only about sex per se, but about emotional intimacy, about how to ask somebody on a date. I mean, I've been in sex ed classrooms where teachers have said, how do you ask somebody on a date? And the kids just go, I don't know. They're just like, how do we talk to kids about, conducting their social lives in ways that are ethical and pleasurable and responsible?
Yeah. Is there an answer? No,
we don't. That's a rhetorical question. But how do we do it? What do we say? There was research from Making Caring Common, that shows things like that, just on a basic level. 2/3 of parents have never talked to their boys about not having sex with somebody who's intoxicated, because that would be assault. The great majority of boys, their parents have never said a word to them about how do you make sure that your partner wants to be having sex with you and is comfortable doing so. Have you ever had? I mean, I think we all want to raise kids with integrity, who are decent people. But how many conversations have you had with your son about the culture's misogyny, about not calling girls bitch and hoe? How many? How much have you talked to them about that? And a lot of those conversations would seem self-evident to an adult, like those ideas. But given the breadth of sexual misconduct and harassment, and the fact that that same Making Caring Common survey found 90% of girls had been sexually harassed. Boys are not getting the message by osmosis.
No, they're really not. And also we've got Harvey Weinstein, obviously, with the
but when we talk about people like Weinstein, though, I always think it's really easy to point there, because we want to think that people who commit sexual assault are monsters, and that only monsters commit sexual assault,
which isn't true, right?
Which isn't true. And one of the things that boys were wrestling with, and that I was wrestling with, was how, a good guy can do a bad thing, and what do we do when that happens, and how do we create pathways of accountability for them? Because there were boys in the book who definitely confided that they had crossed lines.
Yeah.
They had been later, or even at the time, kind of aware of it. And they were struggling with, then what do I do with that? And also on a, just not even talking about assault per se, but the way and all these things that we're talking about, mainstream media, porn, all these things, socialize boys towards this. Talking to your son about the ways, the gender dynamics of things like that. Girls don't always want what you think they want or what you want, or that guys tend to over-perceive yes, especially when they're drunk, and think when boys are drunk they may perceive any friendliness on the part of a woman at all as a come on. They under-perceive no and hesitation. All these things that make them even more vulnerable when they've been drinking, which is, again, if they're going into a college party hookup culture, really important to understand.
I hate to be the one that has to ask the last question.
Oh, is that the last? Oh,
We have one more question.
oh dear. Okay, well,
Really?
We're going to open it up for Q&As.
Is that bad? What's wrong with that?
No, because I just feel like
you want to just keep
I
going?
have to be the bad guy who keeps telling.
Oh, you keep that.
I'm not the bad. I'm never
All
the
right.
bad guy that keeps time. I was just thinking about Harvey also because they were trying to pick the jury, just all
I know.
and just seeing him with the walker walking in there. But no, it's like every day, people making good people making bad choices.
Right.
But in the book, listening to, I really heard the book in my head. I didn't do an audiobook, but I could hear your voice and the boys' voices in my head. And the boys that were like sort of slowly realizing, yeah, I guess I did do that. I did push her head. I did. I didn't take a no. I didn't ask, or I did. It was really fascinating.
Or I'm not sure. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no.
Right.
That was a big one where boys would say, "I really look at that and I think, I don't know if what I did was okay."
Right. It sounds like there was some of that realization as they were talking to
and
you.
that was, in a way, the fact that they were wrestling with that in and of itself is a source of progress, right? They were really, it was what, in those conversations, I think that they often started with, I've never told anybody this before, but.
How does it feel to be the keeper of that?
I already was the keeper of so much with girls that it just sort of has become a role that I take on and try to take on with compassion, and I feel like it gives the kids that I talk to, it's not my job to do therapy or offer advice. It would be inappropriate, but just the act, I think, of bearing witness and of creating a safe space where they can wrestle with their ideas and their interior lives and their confusions and their, hopes and regrets in a really real way, I think gives them something.
Yeah, it's a very hopeful book. I know the narrative. I know there was a lot that you couldn't use that, you're interviewing and there's always extra. But did writing Boys and Sex make you want to do more work with the boys?
Interesting question. I don't know. I don't know. If that's the what are you going to do next question.
Masks.
I have. Yeah, the book came out 5 days ago, so don't bug me.
What do you got
it's
for
basically. I don't know what where this will lead me. Girls, what I didn't know what I was going to do after Girls and Sex, and it became clear on the road that the next piece was Boys and Sex. So maybe as I'm going around with this book, it will become clearer to me what where I might be interested in going next.
Yeah, that's exciting, right? When you get that, like, I know what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, you have your last question?
Yeah, sorry.
I thought that kind of was the last
Nah,
question.
it wasn't really.
Okay.
No.
Well, my next question was kind of going to be that you've been on tour for a handful of days now, and just kind of what is the reader reaction that you're getting about the book?
Oh my gosh, it's been totally overwhelming. It really, maybe, I don't know if it's more than Girls and Sex or not, but it has been certainly on a par, and that same sense that people are really eager to start having these conversations, and I think it is. I mean, that is really the upside of the ugly in our culture right now. That is the upside of the ugly of our president and of Weinstein and of all these things, that it has. I feel like back in the 90s when I first started writing about girls, my first book on girls came out in 1994. I know, I've been around a while. When parents of boys would say to me, so relieved to have a boy, I don't have to think about these things. All the time. All the time. Right? I mean, and I would think, really? They don't say that anymore.
Wow.
They really want to, and of course they don't,
right.
because the world has changed. It's not that, that behavior has changed necessarily, but our relationship to that behavior has changed. And although, again, the focus has been on the negative and on sexual violence, it's also this opportunity to talk about the what can be, what should be, the do's as well as the don'ts. And that is what's really exciting to me.
Wow.
Awesome. Well,
thank you so much. This was awesome. Now we're opening it up to questions. Oh, there we go.
Hey, Peggy.
Hi.
I work for a feminist organization here in Rhode Island, and we're starting to pay a lot of attention to male allyship and ways in which men can support women as, it isn't the job of the oppressed to fix the system's problem. And so I'm wondering with younger men if there are conversations about non-toxic masculinity, if they even have an awareness of what that is at this point.
Yeah. Should we repeat the
Yeah, you can paraphrase
the question. Was sort of about, are there conversations among young men around non-toxic masculinity? So I try to shift that word, because even non-toxic contains in it the seeds of pathology, and there has been a lot of pathologizing of. I think there's a lot of pathologizing of men, of this desire to be vulnerable, like that, that is just not allowed. But it was an interesting thing that when I asked guys what they liked about being a guy, I would say, what's the ideal guy? What do you dislike about being a guy? What do you like about being a guy? That one they would tend to draw a blank on. So their own vision of what a more generative idea of expansive idea of what masculinity would be was hard. And I think that there's a lot of organizations, there's not as many organizations, let me walk that back. There's a lot of organizations that we've had since, I think, starting in the 90s, for girls that work, increasingly on, and it's not perfect, it's not done, all of that, but we have a lot more support for girls around media literacy, around body image, around professional and academic success, around self-image, self-esteem, all of that. We haven't caught up with that with boys from, and I do think people that in a way feminism is the answer for boys as well, because it's the desire to allow people their full humanity, regardless of gender, and to be able to put that together both from a sense of public opportunity and economic and political opportunity, and private responsibility and private opportunity. And so I think that's where we need to go with guys too, and we're seeing some of that. There's certain organizations and such that are sort of dotted around the country. Coaching Boys into Men is fantastic, or there's various other ones, but not enough. So I think that having that conversation, I think watching the Tony Porter's TED Talk. Have you ever seen that? A Call to Men.
Oh yes.
Yeah, right? I mean, having your son watch A Call to Men is a pretty profound experience, I think, to really think about the masculinity issues. His organization is fantastic. So there are these places that are starting, and I'm hoping that by sort of elevating the conversation a little bit, that can form those sorts of connections. Jackson Katz's work, there's a lot of really great work, but it needs to break through on a level of talking to young men and getting them talking. But they themselves, absolutely, the guys that I was talking to, were aware they could see what was, this kind of expectation, the mask, the toxic masculinity, the man box, whatever you want to call it, as well as who they really were and the ways that they didn't want to, couldn't, or rejected, or resisted, or fell silent in the face of fitting into that.
Thank you. Yes.
I have so many questions.
Oh, sorry. Okay, Lisa's going.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
So one is, I have a 13-year-old, and he just on the recent holiday vacation, he got these constant Snapchats from this girl at school, and he's like constantly responding to her, reaching out, and like I'm not even sure what should I be aware of with Snapchat and what like.
That it's the devil. How's that? I mean, I actually don't think Snapchat is appropriate for a 13-year-old, to be honest.
Right.
I think I'm sorry. It's too hot in here.
I know, it's very hot.
I'm just going to put my hair up in a weird way.
It's
sorry.
cute. I love it.
Because we're on the radio, so it's okay. I really do think that social media is inappropriate for a 13-year-old, honestly, because it just is like their impulsivity and their brain development and all they are not. It's that's the line in terms of the rules around when they're allowed by the social media companies allegedly to be on there.
Oh.
But I don't think they are developmentally ready for that. And I say that because every other minute somebody is telling me about some heinous social media situation of, boys sending pictures of girls' heads that they've pasted onto naked bodies, or sending horrible memes to one another, or girls thinking that they want a boy to like him, and the way that they're going to get him to like them is by sending a nude picture when they're 13 years old, or like all these different things. And it can be hard to, in the moment, know what to do to that. And so, and talking, I think, with a boy, not only about what he shouldn't do, but what pressures girls might feel to do things that might be against their own self-interest on social media.
Yeah.
And what happens when you get that, a friend of mine's daughter got, sorry, this is gross, but a meme, a thing on social media the other day that the kids were passing, that was a woman being gagged by a giant penis with mascara running down her face. So this girl is 14, she's in 9th grade. And her response, of course, the internal response was, ew. The external response was, send it along. Hot potato, pass it along. And that's and my friend said to her, that was non-consensual that you got that. Also illegal. Also what, you sending it along to somebody else without their consent is a violation, and, is really wrong. And it was just like, on the upside, it generated a lot of conversation, but on the downside, that's the kind of things that kids that age will do just reflexively. And with boys, I got very interested in thinking about, and I read a lot, because I'm always thinking about language, about the word hilarious. I got very obsessed with how boys use hilarious, and it's a word that they use as kind of a deflective shield. So it's a default position you can take when something's disturbing, when it's reprehensible, when it violates your morals, and you don't want to be targeted or bullied or be seen as weak or vulnerable. So you can always default to hilarious. And it's also another way that disconnects boys' heads from their hearts, their heads from from their consciences, and it also subverts potential compassion for the victim of that hilarity. And at the far end of that spectrum, I started thinking about it because I noticed that in the really high-profile high school rape cases that had made the news, like Steubenville, what the boys said was, "We thought it was hilarious. We thought we were being hilarious." So it's a way to, dehumanize and avoid compassion and empathy for wherever that is that you have. And it's particularly troubling in bystanders, If it's hilarious, no problem. So sort of noticing those ways, I think, in addition to everything else, not just Snapchat, but that culture, that social media culture, that visual culture, the mainstream media culture, keeps reinforcing that idea of dehumanization, disconnection for boys, objectification for girls. I think is really important.
So he's off Snapchat now, I guess, right?
No. Now he's lost Snapchat.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying, I just, well, again,
Yeah.
not talking. Let's just say that if I had a child, I wouldn't have let them on
Yeah.
Snapchat till they were 16, and then reluctantly,
Yeah. No, it's
personally.
It's a problem. Lisa.
So, just thinking about what you said about language and kind of the hookup culture that we have. I have 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, 2 teenage girls and a 12-year-old boy. One of my daughters was assaulted, and even though she had said no, very clear terms, when we were dealing with like the DA and stuff, she's disabled, so that was a whole complicated thing. But they said, well, the language, she didn't say no in the right way, and the hookup culture now makes it so hard for people to understand, no is no, even though she said multiple times, I do not want this, please stop. The explanation we were hearing from police, the DA, even psychologists that were involved and social workers said that hookup culture really kind of clouds the message now. No really isn't no. You're seeing that, and then how do I worry, about my girls going to college and the whole hookup, and then also my son, because it's hard for me to find, we've had multiple discussions about it and different ways to do it, but I am hearing that from both my children and their friends that the hookup thing is kind of the norm now.
Yeah.
And what you said to me about the physical reaction, about being tickled by someone, you'll laugh. Boys, and I've had a lot of talk with my friends, and their kids were very open, and they said, well, yeah, they kind of moan, or they...
Yeah, I talk about that very thing.
You take that as a yes,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's just a visceral reaction.
You know who else takes that as a yes? Is, nobody ever thinks they're a rapist. And even men who keep sex slaves in war zones have been shown in research not to think they're a rapist. The guy, and for the same reasons, she moaned. She didn't say, whatever. She didn't say no because she was terrified, whatever. I'm very sorry that happened to your daughter and to your family, and for all that you must have gone through and be going through around that. And it's interesting because I have a whole chapter in the book called I Know I'm a Good Guy, But. And I really, for a while, I wanted to call the book that because I heard that so many times when I was interviewing about boys. I know I'm a good guy, but... And the time they weren't a good guy. And what happens when you fall from that pedestal. And how you reckon with that. And how you recognize that. And a lot of the research around the way that guys in hookup culture perceive girls' behavior and interactions, like I said, they vastly overperceive yes. There was research that shows and just about anything could be a yes, and yes, winking might mean yes, whatever. It might mean yes, it might not. But what all these things had in common, a lot of the things that the researchers found had only been listed once, so really anything, was that the guys decided to perceive it as yes. And that kind of gives, so when they say, well, she didn't clearly say no, I'm not a mind reader, but they seem to be really good at mind reading when they want to hear yes. So that's something to really discuss. It's not no means no, it's only yes means yes. And how do we make sure that yes is really clear? And boys would talk about that in all kinds of different ways, from, feeling like they would be incredibly scrupulous about that, to boys who were really aware and yet still found themselves in situations. There's a guy, actually this boy that's at the end of the Times piece that I have, that I wrote, that one of the most thoughtful, thoughtful guys that I talked to really probed the ideas of what his socialization had been like and how lousy it had been. And he was talking about an interaction he had with a girl where they had gotten to, he met her one night, then they got together the next night, and she invited him back to her house. So to him, it was like, okay, it's on, and so they get there, and he says, how he put it was boom, 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 and then she put her hand on, and he was just about to start to have intercourse with her, and she put her hand on his chest and said, "Oh, I don't want that." And he said in that moment, he just kind of went, "What?" Not because he thought she should, but because he said he suddenly saw the whole dynamic play out and how little communication there had been, how much alcohol there had been, how, he just was making this assumption in his head, going on autopilot as a guy, and it kind of devastated him. And then they ended up staying up all night talking, which, that was a much better, outcome. And it really meant a lot to him to do that. And he really started thinking a lot about it. And I talked to a lot of guys in the last chapter, or the second to last chapter of the book too, who'd had these experiences where they had either been recognized they had done something, or where it had been brought to their attention by authorities or something, where when they could look at it in the eye and really think about it and wrestle with it and see, kind of step back and see the whole picture of how, why they did that, how they got there, what assumptions they had made, it could make a real difference in their lives. So I really, again, we just aren't having these discussions, and that is hard on boys, and it's disastrous for girls like your daughter.
Well, I just worry about, so how do we combat that? The hookup culture, the accessibility to porn. I got it.
That's what I'm trying to do, is to try to I want to combat it by hoping that, that by starting the conversation that combats it. When I think about like our life, what we've done with girls over the years, over the last 25 years, I feel like that's where we are with boys, where we were with girls 25 years ago. I hope it doesn't take 25 years to evolve them, but yeah, me too, seriously. But I have every hope and belief that it's possible, because now it's imperative, because now those parents who, like I said, those parents who used to say, "I'm glad I don't have girls and don't have to deal with this," are like, "Oh my God, my job is harder. Mm-hmm. What do I do?" And I really think that that's going to create a cultural shift. I really, really do.
Thank you.
Last question? Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Sorry.
I was hoping you could comment a little bit about any differences in themes and conversations with the boys who identified as bisexual or gay?
Yeah. So more gay than bisexual. I talked to gay boys and trans boys. And there were a couple things with the gay boys that really struck me. One was in relationship to something that I think straight people can learn from gay boys, which is that gay boys really were actually a model of establishing consent and negotiating the parameters of a sexual relationship, because they kind of had to be, because it was not obvious for them, who is going to do what with whom, under, and how. So you have to learn how to talk about it. And they were much better at that. And, one of the guys said to me, "I don't get why straight guys are so resistant to this conversation about consent, because when we talk about consent, it means we're having sex. And that's great, And Dan Savage, who is a sex columnist and many other things, always refers to the 4 magic words that gay guys use at the moment of consent, which is, "What are you into?" And that is such an amazing open-ended question, as opposed to the sort of way that we think about it as straight people, as a sort of prescribed series of, yes or no's to a predetermined set of events that one person is asking the other. It's a way to build a mutual, equitable experience that might be gratifying for everybody. I do fear, and I've said this, Dan is a gay guy. He's used to talking to gay guys about this. I do fear in a heterosexual interaction that if a guy said, "What are you into?" to a teenage or early college age girl, their response would be, I have no idea, right? Because you're so disconnected from your body. So that points up just the dynamic, just that. I think, wow, that's a dynamic, that's interesting. How do we address that? What if we could? What if they could ask that question and actually answer it, with one another? How amazing would that be? So that was one piece. So that was a takeaway from Gay Boys. And of course, it's a new day, right? We've got a gay guy running for president. We have same-sex marriage. We still have homophobia and all kinds of violence and all this stuff, but there's, boys come out much younger to much more family acceptance. The boy who frames the chapter on gay and trans boys is from rural Tennessee, from a Republican family, and he comes out and they're like, great, like no problemo. But what struck me in talking to those boys was that what had been accepted was a kind of social queerness. So it was okay to be like the gay best friend or the theater boy or, the queer eye or whatever, the shopping buddy. But the sex part, still nobody was talking about that. And what I was finding with a lot of older teenage boys, but under 18, was that they were lying about their age, they were going on Grindr, and they were hooking up with much older guys, and it was dangerous, and nobody knew they were doing it. Obviously, their parents didn't know, their friends didn't know. One guy said to me, well, I try to do it at the person's. He was telling me about an experience in a hotel, and he said, I don't usually do that. I usually go to their houses because I think that's safer. Right? You're a grown-up. You know the difference. It's like, well, let's just think about that, because in a hotel, somebody might hear you, not to put too fine a point on it, but somebody might hear you scream, and the guy had to put a credit card down. If you go to his house, he could chop you up in little pieces and bury you in the backyard, and nobody would be any the wiser. And you just went, he's 16. Oh, I never thought about that. That was terrifying to me. And so I felt really strongly that we need to, those of us who are straight parents of gay boys, we have to be, and everybody needs to be inclusive. I know it's the third rail of sex ed. Got to be inclusive of LGBTQ plus perspective in sex ed class for those kids and also for everybody, so that those behaviors are not marginalized or stigmatized in the same way for theirs. And they, those kids deserve age-appropriate social relationships. And so thinking also how we can provide those for them so that they don't feel, marginalized, stigmatized, and end up going, hiding not only their sexual orientation, but their actual sexual practices and doing things that are dangerous.
Thank you. Wow. I hate to end this party, but we do have to, right? We do. I know. Thank you.
Peggy will be up signing.
I'll be out front.
Peggy will be signing. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And the conversation will continue. Thank you, everybody.
That was so fun. So zip me up there so
Yes,
that I
I'm
don't
going to zip you up in the pot. I'm going to zip you up there.